the North Atlantic, 500 nautical miles south of Cape Farewell, Greenland. On May 25, 1941, a metallic, sharp, and unnatural ping had struck the U-557's hull, echoing through every compartment and causing the young midshipman's hand to tremble on the periscope handles. His fear wasn't of the enemy above, but of the sound he just heard reverberate through the steel hull. Later, in his private journal, Fritz zur See Herbert Werner, discovered decades after the war, would write that the sound was like nothing we had trained for. It rang through our boat like a church bell announcing our funeral. The British had found them beneath the waves, sanctuary. Lost the end of U-boat impunity for 3 years. German U-boat crews had operated with near impunity, certain that the ocean depths offered sanctuary from enemy detection. They had been taught that submerging meant disappearing, that the dark waters would cloak them as effectively as night cloaked a surface raider. Yet, on this spring morning in 1941, the 22-year-old Werner and 48 other men aboard U-557 learned a terrifying truth. The ocean no longer hid them. The Allies possessed technology that could see through water itself. This single ping, though none of the submariners understood it then, represented the opening movement of a technological symphony that would forever transform submarine warfare. Over the next 4 years, Allied sonar and detection systems would evolve from crude experimental devices into precision hunting tools, inflicting a systematic psychological demolition on German U-boat crews. The mathematics of underwater warfare were being rewritten, not in torpedo calculations, but in sound waves that would expose the U-boat force to destruction on an unprecedented scale. The collapse of German submarine dominance had begun. From hydrophones to ASDIC, the technology of underwater sound. The journey toward this pivotal moment had started 23 years earlier, in the final months of World War I. British and French scientists, desperate to counter the Kaiser's U-boats that had nearly starved Britain into submission, had begun experimenting with underwater sound detection. The Royal Navy's anti-submarine division developed the first primitive sonar sets in shore-based laboratories in 1918. However, the armistice came before these devices could be deployed in meaningful numbers. In the entire Great War, only 3 U-boats were credited to hydrophone detection. The technology that would revolutionize anti-submarine warfare gestated slowly during the 1920s and 1930s at His Majesty's ship Osprey, the Royal Navy's anti-submarine school at Portland. British scientists refined the basic principles. The system they developed, named ASDIC, Anti-Submarine Detection Investigation Committee, worked by transmitting a high-frequency sound pulse through water. When this pulse struck a solid object, it reflected back as an echo. By measuring the time between transmission and echo, operators could calculate the range to a target. By rotating the transmitter, they could determine bearing. The first operational ASDIC sets went to sea aboard British destroyers in 1928. These early units were crude affairs, with the quartz crystal oscillator needing to be suspended over the ship's side. Range was limited to 3,500 yards in optimal conditions, and the system could not determine depth, only direction and range. Operators using headphones had to distinguish genuine submarine echoes from returns bouncing off whales, fish schools, ship wakes, and thermal layers in the water. By 1939, however, the Royal Navy's faith in ASDIC had grown so absolute that senior admiral staff believed the submarine threat had been largely overcome. Every Royal Navy destroyer carried the equipment, and war plans assumed convoys protected by ASDIC-equipped escorts would suffer minimal losses. This confidence would prove tragically premature. The first happy time and shattered belief on September 3, 1939, hours after Britain declared war on Germany. The passenger liner Athenia was torpedoed by U-30 west of Ireland. The Battle of the Atlantic had begun, and German U-boat commanders immediately discovered that the vaunted British anti-submarine defenses were far less formidable than advertised. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commanding the U-boat force, watched with satisfaction as his submarines achieved what became known as the first happy time. German submariners operated with carefully cultivated confidence in their invisibility. Training emphasized that a submerged U-boat was essentially undetectable. The ocean, instructors taught, absorbed sound, and masked movement. Feldwebel Wolfgang Hirschfeld, senior radio operator aboard U-109, recorded in his secret diary. "We believed the enemy relied on the same listening devices from the last war. As long as we maintained silence after diving, we thought we were safe. This belief would soon be shattered." The first German U-boat crews to encounter active sonar experienced not just technological surprise, but existential shock. When an ASDIC pulse struck a submerged hull, it produced a distinctive sound inside the boat. Survivors described it as dropping dried peas into a tin can, a rapid series of metallic clicks that grew louder as the hunting ship approached. Unlike the steady drone of ship propellers heard through hydrophones, the sonar ping was unmistakably artificial, undeniably directional, and terrifyingly precise. Iron Coffins, Werner's baptism under Sonar Lieutenant Herbert Werner, serving as watch officer aboard U-557 during his first war patrol in May 1941, experienced his baptism under sonar detection while stalking a convoy south of Greenland. His memoir, Iron Coffins, captured the moment. "The destroyer's ASDIC found us at periscope depth. The metallic pinging grew faster, louder. Each ping struck our hull and rang through the boat. Every man froze at his station. We knew with absolute certainty that the enemy above knew exactly where we were." The hunter had become the hunted Werner, barely 6 months removed from Naval Academy, watched his commanding officer's face transform from confident hunter to cautious survivor. His captain, a veteran of successful patrols, immediately ordered a dive to 200 meters. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, but every man understood the meaning of the pinging. Their greatest tactical advantage, invisibility, had been stripped away by technology they barely understood. The 7-hour ordeal what followed was 7 hours of depth charge attacks. U-557 dove to 200 meters, rigged for silent running, and crept away at minimum speed. The crew heard the destroyer's screws overhead and counted the seconds until the explosions after the splash of depth charges entering the water. Each detonation sent shock waves through the hull, shattering light bulbs, making paint chips fall from bulkheads, and causing men to bleed from ears and noses. Inside the submarine, time moved with agonizing slowness. They sat or stood in near total silence to prevent a dropped wrench or heavy footsteps from giving away their position. The temperature climbed past 35 Celsius calor, and condensation dripped from pipes. After 3 hours submerged, carbon dioxide levels rose dangerously high, and men gasped for breath. The destroyer above was relentless. The ASDIC operator held solid contact. Every few minutes, the metallic pinging would intensify as the hunter closed for another attack. The crew would brace themselves, waiting for the splashes and counting for the explosions. 7 seconds for a charge set to 100 meters. 20 seconds for 300 meter. Closer charges bodily lifted the boat, and leaks appeared in the pressure hull, with thin jets of seawater spraying under tremendous pressure. After 7 hours, U-557 had descended to 280 meters, well beyond its designed crush depth of 220 meters. Finally, mercifully, the pinging stopped, and the destroyer's propeller noise faded. U-557 waited another 2 hours before slowly ascending. When the boat finally surfaced after 9 hours submerged, men stumbled onto the conning tower, sucking in great lungfuls of clean Atlantic air and savoring survival. ASDIC's limitations and U-boat tactics, U-557 survived, as did thousands of other German submarines in the early war years. The ASDIC operators aboard Allied escorts, while able to detect U-boats, faced critical limitations, the dead zone. At ranges under 200 yards, the transmitted pulse and returning echo merged, creating a blind spot just as the attacking ship closed for the kill. Depth charges had to be dropped over the stern after the submarine had been lost to detection, giving clever commanders precious seconds to execute evasive maneuvers. Poor performance in rough seas. Thermoclines, temperature layers in the water, bent sound waves and created shadow zones where submarines could hide. Silent running. Experienced U-boat commanders learned to dive beneath thermal layers and mastered the art of silent running, shutting down all non-essential machinery. Through 1940 and 1941, These tactics allowed German submarines to maintain operational effectiveness. Commanders like Werner, who survived their first encounter with ASDIC, studied the technology's weaknesses. They learned to hide within the noise barrier created by a convoy itself, where the sound of 50 merchant ships masked a submarine signature. German passive detection, the German Navy's own underwater detection systems, differed fundamentally from Allied active sonar. German engineers had developed sophisticated passive listening arrays. The Gruppenhörgerät, group listening device, standard on U-boats from 1935, consisted of 48 hydrophones on each side of the bow. These could detect individual ships out to 20 kilometers and large convoys up to 100 kilometers, though bearings were imprecise for torpedo attacks. This technological philosophy reflected German thinking. U-boats were hunters, not prey. They assumed enemies would rely on similar passive systems, and the possibility that Allied ships could actively track submerged submarines using reflected sound waves was not taken seriously in war planning. Technological revolution. Sonar in 1942, the year 1942, brought devastating changes to the Atlantic battlefield. After the U.S. entered the war, Admiral Dönitz's U-boats began operating along the American East Coast, exploiting the United States' complete unpreparedness. This second happy time saw merchant ships sinking by the hundreds. Simultaneously, British and American scientists were revolutionizing anti-submarine technology. In September 1940, Britain had transferred ASDIC technology to the United States for free. American engineers at the Naval Research Laboratory began parallel development of what they termed sonar, sound navigation and ranging. By early 1942, coordinated research programs were producing rapid breakthroughs. American engineers replaced the hand-assembled quartz crystal transducers with magnetostrictive transducers using nickel tubes that could be mass-produced. American shipyards began installing sonar equipment on every destroyer, destroyer escort, and corvette rolling off production lines by mid-1942. Critical sonar improvements. 3 critical improvements transformed Allied sonar from a useful but limited tool into a lethal submarine killer. Power rotation systems. Electric motors replaced manual hand cranks, allowing ASDIC heads to scan through wider arcs more quickly. Escorts could sweep their entire forward arc in the time previously required for a narrow slice of ocean. Streamlined steel domes, replacing canvas covers. These allowed escorts to maintain effective search speeds up to 20 knots, instead of being limited to 15. The smooth flow of water past the transducer meant escorts could close on submarines quickly without losing sonar contact. Dual frequency systems, operating at both 14 and 30 kilocycles. These dramatically improved range and resolution. Low-frequency transmissions traveled farther for maximum range, while high-frequency pulses gave sharp, detailed echoes for precise targeting as range closed. Most revolutionary of all was the Type 147 ASDIC set, developed in 1943, which could track submarines in 3 dimensions. This system provided not just bearing and range, but depth. For the first time, Allied escorts could know precisely where a submarine sat in 3-dimensional ocean space, and depth charge patterns could be set with devastating accuracy. The underwater sanctuary was disappearing. The psychological demolition. Persistent contact German U-boat crews began experiencing these improvements as an inexplicable increase in detection rates. Oberleutnant Werner, promoted to first watch officer aboard U-230 in late 1942, recorded the change. In 1941, if we dove deep and maintained silence, escorts usually lost us within an hour. By 1943, they held contact for 5, 6, 7 hours. They always seemed to know our depth. Charges exploded at precisely our depth. It was as if they could see us. The Type 147 ASDIC could track submarines in 3 dimensions simultaneously, rendering German U-boat tactics developed against earlier 2-dimensional systems obsolete. Diving deep no longer provided safety. Silent running no longer guaranteed invisibility. The psychological impact of persistent sonar contact was profound. The steady ping, ping, ping of sonar striking the hull became a death knell, a constant maddening sound that penetrated every compartment. Veterans described it as a fingernail dragging across slate, amplified 1,000 times. There was no escaping it. Every U-boat sailor understood the physics. Simple division of time delay into distance, and the angle of the reflection revealing depth. The submarine had nowhere to hide. Feldwebel Hirschfeld, whose U-109s survived multiple attacks through 1942 and early 1943, captured the terror in his diary. The pinging never stops. It follows us hour after hour. We sit in darkness. Still the pinging continues. We know they are above us, circling, waiting. When the splashes come, we count. Then we wait for the explosions, wondering if this pattern will be the one that cracks our hull and sends seawater flooding in. Men who had been confident warriors were becoming traumatized survivors, shaking uncontrollably or becoming catatonic after severe attacks. The captains maintained routine, but everyone knew the truth. The ocean no longer protected them. Black May, the climactic crisis. The spring of 1943 brought the climactic crisis of the Battle of the Atlantic. Though German U-boats sank almost 700,000 tons of merchant shipping in March, coming closer to severing Britain's Atlantic lifeline than at any other point, this represented the apex of their effectiveness, not the beginning of renewed dominance. The technological and tactical balance was shifting decisively. Allied shipyards were producing escort vessels, destroyer escorts, corvettes, and frigates, equipped with improved sonar systems faster than they could be sunk. Very long range. Liberator aircraft carrying both radar and sonar buoys closed the mid-Atlantic air gap. May 1943 became Black May for the Kriegsmarine. 41 U-boats were destroyed, 25% of operational strength. On May 24th, Admiral Dönitz, shocked at these catastrophic losses, ordered the temporary withdrawal of U-boats from the North Atlantic. We are facing a situation where enemy attempts to restrict our operations have succeeded. Their sea and air anti-submarine forces have increased enormously. Our losses have become unsustainable. The statistics told a brutal story. 43% of the U-boats deployed in the North Atlantic in the first 3 weeks of May never returned to port. 2 years earlier, the exchange rate had been 10 merchant ships per U-boat per patrol. Now the ratio was 12 merchant ships sunk for every U-boat lost. Submarines were being destroyed faster than they could sink targets. Individual boat losses underscored the human cost. U-463, detected by ASDIC, was hunted for 3 hours. Nothing worked against the firm sonar contact. The commander finally surfaced to fight and was destroyed in minutes. U-192 was hunted for 6 hours, diving to 300 meters. Escorts coordinated perfectly, and the precisely targeted depth charges cracked the pressure hull. Nearly all U-boats lost were first detected by radar or sonar. The technological advantage had shifted so decisively that German submarines could barely operate. For the crews still at sea, the psychological impact was devastating. The ocean, once a German hunting ground, had become a killing field where U-boats were the prey. Oberleutnant Werner, commanding his own boat, U-415, in April 1944, experienced the new reality firsthand. We were detected within hours. For 3 days, escorts hunted us relentlessly. Their sonar never lost contact. When we tried to escape on the surface at night, aircraft appeared with searchlights. There was no sanctuary left. We had become targets in a shooting gallery. The U-boats' retreat from the patrol area, following 60 hours submerged and running on electric motors at 3 knots, began after the attack. Werner was aware that Allied hunter-killer groups coordinated their searches, meaning an aircraft detection would quickly bring surface escorts to the area. The relentless pursuit of U-415 inevitably. On April 18th, the chilling sound of ASDIC pings began to echo through the hull, confirming an escort had picked up their trail. Werner took the boat deeper, to 250 meters, and slowed to silent running speed, but the pinging continued. The escort above maintained solid contact for hour after hour. Werner attempted every evasive technique. He altered course 90 degrees, but the pinging followed. He briefly increased speed, then slowed again, hoping to confuse the ASDIC operator. But the pinging only intensified, indicating the escort was closing. He released a Pillenwerfer, bubble decoy, but the pinging never wavered. The Allied operator was experienced enough to distinguish the genuine submarine echo from the decoy. After 8 hours of continuous contact, depth charges began to fall. The patterns were terrifyingly accurate, exploding at precisely 250 meters, exactly where U-415 was running. Werner took the boat deeper still to 300 meters. The hull groaned continuously under the pressure and paint peeled from bulkheads. The attack continued through the night and into the next morning, leaving Werner's crew exhausted and the boat's batteries nearly depleted. Facing an impossible choice, surface and fight, remain submerged until batteries died, or try to outlast the hunter, Werner chose to wait. For 16 hours, U-415 crept through the depths while death circled overhead. Finally, the pinging stopped. The escort had expended all depth charges and departed. Werner waited 4 more hours before surfacing to an empty ocean. The boat limped back toward France, its mission aborted and its crew traumatized. U-415 never made another war patrol, being sunk in its bunker at Toulon in July 1944. Werner survived only because he was ashore when the bombs fell. The integration of Allied anti-submarine systems, the technological gap was widening. By mid-1943, Allied escorts carried not just improved sonar, but an entire anti-submarine warfare system. High-frequency direction finding, HFDUF, could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions radar, could detect surfaced submarines at night or in fog. Sonar buoys dropped from aircraft created underwater listening networks over vast areas, ahead throwing weapons like Hedgehog and Squid projected depth charge patterns forward while maintaining sonar contact, eliminating the critical dead zone that had previously allowed submarines to escape. The integration of these systems created a detection network that was greater than the sum of its parts. A typical convoy in mid-1943 was protected by 6 to 8 escorts, each carrying ASDIC, radar, and HFDUF, with air cover provided by aircraft from land or escort carriers. The mid-Atlantic gap had been closed, ensuring that every square mile of ocean the convoy traversed was monitored by multiple overlapping sensor systems. When a U-boat approached such a convoy, detection was nearly inevitable. The submarine had essentially 3 bad choices: remain distant and unable to attack, close on the surface and be destroyed by aircraft, or close submerged and be destroyed by escorts. Hedgehog and Squid. The Hedgehog weapon system revolutionized anti-submarine attacks. Earlier attacks required escorts to pass over the submarine, losing ASDIC contact in the final moments. Hedgehog, however, fired 24 small bombs forward in an elliptical pattern, while the escort maintained contact. Each bomb was armed by contact with a hard surface. Silence after firing meant a miss. Explosions meant a hit, which was usually fatal, as one bomb striking the hull could detonate adjacent bombs. The Squid system, introduced in late 1943, was even more lethal. 3 large mortars fired patterns of 3 depth charges 250 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike Hedgehog, Squid charges were set to explode at specific depths, calculated by an automatic computer that processed ASDIC data. Squid-equipped frigates achieved a kill rate of 25% per attack, compared to less than 5% for conventional depth charge attacks. German countermeasures. Too little. Too late German countermeasures proved woefully inadequate. Pillenwerfer, chemical bubble decoys, only fooled inexperienced operators. Veterans quickly learned to distinguish the chaotic echo signature of bubbles from the solid return of a steel hull, bold, cobalt. A more sophisticated decoy that mimicked a snorkel or submarine echo had severe limitations. It could only be deployed from stationary submarines and didn't move horizontally, allowing ASDIC operators to realize the target wasn't a submarine after a few minutes. Alberic, absorbent hull coatings, to reduce sonar reflection were researched but never successfully deployed. The rubber coating degraded rapidly in seawater, added tremendous weight, and most critically, lost its sound-absorbing properties under the pressure of deep diving. The fundamental problem was that German engineers had focused for 20 years on pro-submarine technology, finding targets, while largely ignoring anti-submarine defenses. The Kriegsmarine had assumed future naval warfare would resemble past patterns, preparing for the last war, while the Allies developed technologies for an entirely new kind of warfare. The human cost and the Iron Coffins. The human cost mounted with horrifying speed. By August 1944, 28,000 of the 40,000 men who had served in the U-boat force were dead. The survival rate for submarine crews fell below 30%. Every patrol became a near-certain death sentence. Feldwebel Hirschfeld, who transferred to the larger Type 1D U-boat U-234 in early 1944, wrote of the psychological breakdown. "The new men are terrified before we even leave port. They have heard the statistics. They know 3 boats out of 4 never return. We are sailing in iron coffins." The snorkel, a brief reprieve. The advent of snorkel technology in mid-1944 offered brief hope. This extendable breathing tube allowed U-boats to run diesel engines while remaining submerged, eliminating the need to surface for battery recharging. However, the Allies quickly adapted. Radar could detect even the small snorkel head, and submerged U-boats remained vulnerable to sophisticated sonar. In practice, snorkeling was miserable. Constant pressure changes caused agonizing ear pain when waves washed over the head. Closing the automatic valve, tremendous noise from diesel engines running at full power made normal communication impossible. Fumes leaked into the boat, causing headaches and nausea. Allied radar operators learned to detect snorkel heads with increasing reliability, forcing the submarine deep and cutting short the battery charge. D-Day and decisive defeat by D-Day. June 6, 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively won. Admiral Dönitz ordered every available U-boat, 36 submarines, to attack the invasion fleet. A mission everyone knew was suicidal due to shallow water. Absolute Allied air supremacy and hundreds of surface escorts. Not a single Allied ship was lost to U-boats on the invasion day itself. Of the 36 U-boats committed, 25 were destroyed, a 69% loss rate in 2 months. Not a single troopship or major warship was sunk. The ocean floor off Normandy became littered with German submarine wrecks. 17 U-boat hulls were counted in the invasion area, most showing catastrophic depth charge damage. The Type 31, too late. The Type 31, Elektroboote in the war's final months, was Germany's last desperate attempt at regaining underwater superiority. These revolutionary submarines featured streamlined hulls and massive battery capacity, allowing sustained submerged speeds of 17 knots, cruising speed of 6 knots for 3 days without surfacing, operating depths of 280 meters, hydraulic torpedo reload systems, allowing all 6 bow torpedoes to be fired, reloaded, and fired again in under 20 minutes, synthetic rubber hull coatings, Alberich, and acoustic quieting measures. Had they been available in numbers in 1943, they might have altered the outcome. But only 2 Type 31 boats completed combat patrols before Germany's surrender. Commander Adalbert Schnee's patrol on U-2511 demonstrated its potential to outrun escorts when detected, but also its continued vulnerability to ASDIC. The legacy of the ping for the German submarine crews who survived the war. The memory of sonar detection remained their most persistent nightmare. Herbert Werner, who became an American citizen and a consultant on sonar and underwater acoustics, wrote in his memoir Iron Coffins, "We were defeated not primarily by superior courage or numbers, but by technology we did not understand and could not counter. The Allies learned to see through water. We never developed effective means to hide." The statistics tell a stark story. Of approximately 1,160 U-boats commissioned during World War II, 785 were lost, 30,000 submariners died, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military service in the war. The majority of these losses occurred after May 1943. After Allied sonar systems matured, the technological lesson was stark. Active sonar fundamentally changed submarine warfare. The cat-and-mouse game between submarine stealth and detection technology, which continues to this day, owes its fundamental principles to the brutal education learned in the Atlantic from 1939 to 1945. Post-war legacy, the echo of the ping. The goal of all post-war submarine development was simple: to restore the invisibility that German U-boats lost when Allied sonar matured. Submarine warfare had been fundamentally changed, and every navy in the world studied the brutal lessons of the Battle of the Atlantic. The Type 31's influence on Cold War submarines. The Soviet Union captured several Type 31 submarines and German engineers. These became the foundation for the Whiskey-class submarines, which dominated Soviet naval construction in the 1950s. Soviet naval architects recognized that the future would be dominated by the competition between stealth and detection. incorporating features like anechoic tiles, improved propellers, and machinery isolation systems derived directly from German Type 21 technology. The United States Navy conducted extensive tests on captured Type 21 boats, U-2513 and U-3008. American engineers were particularly impressed by the streamlined hull and large battery capacity. These features directly influenced the design of the Tang-class submarines, America's first purpose-built post-war boats, which incorporated the teardrop hull shape and nearly doubled underwater speed compared to wartime fleet boats. The Royal Navy tested U-2511 thoroughly, concluding that a fast, quiet, deep-diving submarine was still extremely difficult to detect and track, even with improved sonar. This realization drove British submarine development, resulting in the Porpoise-class boats, which incorporated many Type 21 features. Sonar evolution and the new hunted on the detection side. Sonar systems grew exponentially more sophisticated. Passive arrays could detect submarines from hundreds of miles away. Active sonar evolved into multi-frequency systems to defeat countermeasures. Variable depth sonar, towed behind surface ships, could be lowered beneath thermal layers to detect deep-running submarines. By the 1960s, American anti-submarine forces had detection capabilities that exceeded World War II systems by orders of magnitude. Soviet submariners found themselves in the same position German U-boat crews had occupied in 1943. Western sonar was stripping away their underwater sanctuary. Soviet naval archives released after the Cold War showed that their commanders described the psychological impact in terms of the persistent pinging and the helplessness of being tracked underwater, terms nearly identical to those used by German veterans. The technological competition peaked with nuclear-powered submarines whose infinite underwater endurance made them capable of operating submerged for months. Yet even these remained vulnerable to acoustic detection. The fundamental lesson of the Atlantic, that sonar could strip away submarine invisibility, remained valid. The unchanged psychological reality, the human element remained constant.
Submarine crews in all navies understood the lesson German submariners had learned so brutally. Being detected meant being vulnerable.
The distinctive ping of active sonar striking a hull triggered the same primal fear in American, British, Soviet, and French crews that it had in German sailors. That sound meant the enemy knew their position and could deliver weapons. The psychological reality of submarine warfare, shaped by the 1943-1945 experience, persisted unchanged. In 1985, Herbert Werner, then 75, spoke to a small gathering of German submarine veterans in the United States. Reflecting on their shared experience, we were taught that the ocean depths protected us, that submerging meant disappearing. Then we encountered your sonar. That sound, that metallic pinging striking our hulls taught us the ocean no longer hid us. We were defeated by science, by engineering, by the capacity of free societies to innovate faster than we could adapt. The ultimate lesson. The statistics tell a stark story. Of the roughly 1,160 U-boats commissioned, 785 were lost, and 30,000 submariners died, a 75% casualty rate. The majority of these losses occurred after May 1943, the German U-boat experience with Allied. Sonar is one of history's clearest examples of how rapidly military technology can shift strategic balance. The underwater sanctuary was eliminated through applied science and engineering excellence. The strategic impact was decisive. The Atlantic supply line became secure, allowing the massive buildup for D-Day. The metallic ping of sonar pulses striking steel hulls carried a simple, profound message. The ocean no longer hides you. Surface technology can reach into the depths. There is no sanctuary. For German submarine crews, this sound became the audio signature of their obsolescence and their transition from invisible predator to exposed prey. Their experience taught the world's navies that technological superiority trumps traditional military virtues. The Allied sonar that detected German U-boats proved more decisive than the submarine's torpedo tubes, the crew's courage, or the commander's tactical skill.